Hello YouTube family. If anyone had told me at the beginning of this year that I'd be doing a 3-part video series about a subject unrelated to lifestyle medicine, I would have stared at them in utter disbelief. But here I am, and like a river, I've decided to go with the flow. This will be my third, and hopefully for the moment, final commentary related to an incident that sent waves of shock and pain across the land. The tragic death of 21-month-old son of Chimamanda Adichie, a renowned author who has the status of national treasure in Nigeria. This death occurred in a medical facility and is currently being investigated amidst allegations of medical negligence. If you missed my previous 2 videos on the subject, may I encourage you to please watch those in order to understand how and why I landed on today's topic. After my last video, a colleague responded with very useful feedback, which ended by referring to some of my comments as political and saying, you should stay away from the politics. Because I worked with this colleague during my anesthesia residency in Nigeria, I know that this advice came from a good place in his heart. But it touched on a point of reflection and regret that I have heard voiced by no less a person than Pat Utomi, a respected professor of political economics. And to paraphrase his words, Pat says that many of us professionals, to use an expression that belongs in the Caribbean islands, we just put our face forward and concentrated on being good professionals, which is a legitimate thing to do, don't get me wrong. But in so doing, the political space in Nigeria was hijacked by people who majorly were never brought up to understand that the only reason you seek political office is to offer service. They seized the space, and now with the antics of a mafia, have arrogated to themselves the right to decide who may or may not participate. In my 6 years in medical school, I served in every strata of the student union government with the exception of the judiciary. At graduation in 1987, I decided I had done my own share of politics. And like so many of my classmates, I just wanted to focus on being a good doctor. And then what happened? As a direct consequence of dysfunctional government and dysfunctional politics, it became increasingly challenging, some days to the point of impossible, to be the doctors that we set out to be. These circumstances were not medical. They were and still are political. We have agreed surrogate markers of civilization. The 3 key ones being maternal mortality ratio, neonatal mortality ratio, and infant mortality ratio. These measurements indicate how well a society cares for its most vulnerable, how far a society has evolved from being like animals to being like humans. How many bush rats die during pregnancy? We don't know, and frankly speaking, the bush rats don't care. This is how it rolls in the land of wild animals. The primary measure of civilization is not buildings, bridges, or fancy cars. We know that barbarians can drive fancy cars. At the height of the Roman Empire, barbarians made appearances wearing gold. That did not make them civilized. They were just barbarians who were wearing gold. The reason we use these ratios as primary markers is because they indicate when your buildings, transportation, education, healthcare, etc. have not just developed, but they have become interconnected in a resilient way. This does not happen by chance, but by choice. I'm going to compare a few countries using maternal mortality ratio, the measure of how many women die in a bid to give birth. It is measured per 100,000 births. Higher number is bad, lower number is good. This is the map of maternal mortality ratio in Nigeria, taken from the World Health Organization website. In 1985, when I was still a medical student, the number was over 1,300. Almost 40 years later, as I approach retirement, the number is still close to 1,000. To put this in perspective, this is Afghanistan's map. In 1985, it was 2,200, way above the Nigerian figures. In 2023, it is down to 520. Still too many, but look at the trend. This is in spite of the wars, rule of the Taliban, and all the calamities that played out in Afghanistan. I go out with charities on medical mission, and years ago, there was an opportunity to go to Afghanistan. To be honest, I did not have the liver to take up the offer. One of the few countries to which I have said, no thank you. This is Ghana's map. In 1985, it was close to 1,000. In 2023, it is now under 250. 250 mothers dying is still too many, but it is a quarter of the carnage that is happening in Nigeria. This is one of our close neighbors, with whom we like to pick fights over jollof rice in addition to other things. This is Rwanda. Again, similar starting point, over 1,000 in 1985. We know the story of that crazy peak there. That was 1994. But since then, Rwanda has started to heal from its trauma. Now its maternal mortality figures are less than 250. And before you say, Rwanda is a small country, Ghana is a small country. And folks, if you've never met enough Nigerians, let me give this context. Here in the UK, one of our favorite pastimes is moaning about the weather. In Nigeria, one of our favourite pastimes is excusing the inexcusable, particularly when we put on our favourite blinkers of tribe and religion. So Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, is more than 2.5 times the size of Nigeria. The news reports coming out of DRC make it sound like one of the most dysfunctional countries in the region. Even DRC has reduced its maternal mortality ratio to less than 450 in the last report. You notice I have avoided putting any North African country or South Africa because when it comes to markers of civilization, Nigeria and South Africa are not mates. Sorry folks, I know that's a bitter pill to swallow, but as a medic, I'm obliged to state the facts. So when the state of politics is having such a direct and disastrous impact on health and on our ability as medics to even rewrite the narrative, are we still justified in avoiding the politics, aka commenting on the politics as my colleague advised? As medics, at what point does avoidance become an abdication of responsibility? Big shout out to my esteemed colleague Joe Lipton, who in a recent presentation to us in the department shared this slide. Joe has been at the forefront of evolving a system that supports and encourages the development of generic professional capabilities, GPC, for our trainees. This covers the non-clinical and non-technical skills I mentioned in my last video. One of the recent developments on the GPC Hub is a Learning from Incident newsletter. Our trainees are encouraged to reflect and discuss incidents big and small in a supportive environment with a view to learning from them. The real benefit of this slide is that it makes the point that our role as medics is multifaceted and being patient advocates is part of our job. We have not reinvented the wheel here. The ancestors of medicine like Hippocrates and Imhotep had multiple roles. Imhotep is even described as a polymath. If you're a medic and you've never heard of Imhotep, permit me to ask, where have you been? If Hippocrates be the father of medicine, then Imhotep is the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of medicine. There's a lot of greats in there, so I'll simply call him the G5 grandfather of medicine. When Hippocrates went to study medicine in Egypt, it was the writings, techniques, framework laid down by Imhotep that he imbibed. And for those of you with an interest in black history, Imhotep was a black man. Before you go, really? Imhotep's birth is estimated around 3000 BC. 3000 BC, Egypt was a country of black people, and Imhotep just looked how more than 90% of his countrymen would. A well-rounded doctor should have all these capabilities to varying degrees. The boxes are not fixed and can become bigger or smaller depending on the environment. So obviously, if you work in a dysfunctional environment where the funding and capacity for research is non-existent, then that energy could and should be moved into another of the boxes. In Europe, the state of healthcare can be a deciding factor in who wins or loses an election, so the population is already aware. But even so, doctors are still at the forefront of advocating for better conditions and even better service for their patients. If doctors in Europe, where the maternal mortality ratio in many countries is less than 10, do not shy away from speaking to the politics when it is necessary, then who are we? Who but you and I can counter the false narratives being sold to Nigerians? We have highly intelligent, well-educated, well-travelled men currently spinning the false narrative that buildings and bridges are the markers of civilization. There's nothing wrong with the government putting up massive buildings, bridges, driving fancy cars. At best, these can be secondary, tertiary, or even quaternary markers of civilization. They will never usurp the primary markers. How is it that reducing Nigeria's maternal mortality ratio to, in fact, we will accept under 500 for now, is not significant enough to be regarded as a legacy project? This is a legacy project that has been begging to be addressed for over 40 years. Rather, government elects, amongst other things, to spend close to $20 billion and still counting on a coastal highway. From a medical perspective, this is social injustice at the highest level. It is such a loud statement from the political class to the world. It says Nigeria is a place where building things is more important than saving the lives of its mothers. And I should not speak to this because I have to be a good girl and avoid the politics. It is abuse and misuse of the word civilization when it is used to refer to a place where women still die in their hundreds, just trying to bring forth life. In the 70s, a new story broke out about then First Lady of the Philippines, Imelda Marcos, showing pictures of her collection of more than 1,000 pairs of shoes. Now, if it turns out that Oprah Winfrey has more than 1,000 pairs of shoes, I don't think that would be news. Oprah has more than earned the right to. Similarly, if the late Queen of England, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, owned 1,000 pairs of shoes, I do not think anybody would begrudge her that. She was monarch over a country where education is free until you're 16 years and health is free at the point of contact. The reason why Imelda's shoes was a stomach-churning piece of news is that it happened at a time when the average citizen in Philippines was struggling to find 2.5 square meals per day. How do you advocate for patients in a dysfunctional environment without speaking to the politics? That is currently a mystery to me. Maybe I'm just not clever enough to understand it. So if any of you out there have any bright ideas, please drop them in the comment section. I'm willing to be educated. But in my honest, humble opinion, when those who have the education, knowledge, and perspective do not speak up, it is not avoidance, it is abdication. The Gen Zs in Nigeria have tagged themselves the Sorosoke generation. Sorosoke being the Yoruba word for speak up. On this occasion, let me borrow from Gen Z and appeal to people of all generations across the nation. Sorosoke, Sorosita, speak up, speak out, step forth. This is not the time to be silent, for to be silent is to be complicit in the rot.